Hey guys, what's up? It's Charlie here, and today we're going to be looking at 10 scary last words from prison inmates. So we all know that for the worst prisoners, when it's finally their time to go, they do get to say a few words. We've all heard that famous line in movies and TV shows, any last words? Well, sometimes prison inmates have had some very scary and creepy final words. Before we get into them, why not subscribe and press the notification bell too. Coming in at number 10 we have Gary Gilmore. So believe it or not, this is a last word you hear pretty much every day. But before I tell you what his last words were, who was Gary Mark Gilmore? Well, he began doing bad things in 1962. He did things like robbing people for money and also taking their cars. Eventually, he was given a 15-year jail sentence. After 10 years, he was released and he went to live with his cousin in Utah. But just months after moving to Utah, he turned crazy one night. First off, he walked into a gas station, demanded a bunch of money from the cashier named Max Jensen, and then after Max gave him all his money, he took Max's life. The next night, Gary took the life of a motel employee named Ben Bushnell. A few days later, his cousin turned him into the cops. Initially, he denied all the charges, but in 1977, he was given the death sentence. He was sentenced to a firing squad when Gary said his final words. His last words were, "Let's do it." That's right, he seemed to relish the idea of being executed and actually seemed happy about it. But what makes this tale super creepy is it inspired the very famous slogan, "Just do it." We all know that "Just do it" is Nike's slogan, and Dan Wyden, the executive who came up with Nike's slogan, said that Gary's last words were his inspiration. Who'd have thought that such a popular brand slogan would have been inspired by such a terrible man? Next up is AILEEN WUORNOS. If you've seen the Nick Broomfield documentary AILEEN, you'll know all about this woman. She is regarded as one of the most dangerous women of all time. AILEEN had a very tragic childhood, with her father passing away and her getting pregnant by the age of 14. She later got into trouble with the law a lot, with many petty crimes like robbery and theft. However, one day AILEEN went totally insane. She took the life of a man named Richard Mallory. She used a pistol on him and then left him in the woods. She was later linked to 6 other people passing away. And it wasn't long before she was labeled by the media as America's first female serial killer. She said that despite her taking 7 lives, they were all in self-defense. Who knows if this is true or not, but either way the jury did not buy it. She was sentenced to an injection in 2002, and her final words are very scary. She said, "Yes, I would like to just say I'm sailing with the Rock and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus." June the 6th, like a movie, big mothership and all, I'll be back, I'll be back. I'm not sure what June 6th she was referring to, but whatever one it is, we ought to watch out. I have to say, these are some very chilling last words. Next up is James French. This man's final words will make you laugh and also cringe at the same time. In 1958, James French was riding down a street in his car when he saw a hitchhiker. He picked up the hitchhiker and then took their life. He was very quickly arrested and thrown in jail. However, he was given life in jail, which he was very unhappy about. Instead, French said he would rather the state take his life. So, to make them do this, he took the life of his cellmate after going to prison. He was sentenced to go onto the electric chair. He knew that his passing would be a media item and that his last words would be printed in all the newspapers. So he did the tabloid's job for them. His last words were, "How's this for your headline? French fries." Clearly this is a play on words with his own name, but it's very creepy at the same time. There's not many people who would make a joke about them being frazzled, but I guess James French is one very unique individual. Next up is Peter Manuel. So this is a very haunting man who had some haunting last words. He is known as the Beast of Birkenshaw. In the late 1950s, he took many lives in Scotland. He blamed his actions when getting picked on as a child. But I'm pretty sure that many people get picked on as a child, but not everyone does what he did. In court, he fired all of his lawyers and tried to defend himself. However, we all know that never works, and also he had done the crimes pretty clearly. He was sentenced to be hanged on the gallows. And his very creepy last words were, "Turn up the radio and I'll go quietly." I have to say, that's some of the most chilling stuff I've ever read. Next up is John W. Rook. So this is yet another man who's very nonchalant about what's gonna happen to him. In 1980, he took 25-year-old nurse Anne-Marie Roche. She was leaving the parking lot of the hospital she worked at. Rook then took her to an abandoned area and then took her life. In 1986, he was sentenced to have an injection in North Carolina. And his very relaxed and chilling last words were, "Freedom. Freedom at last. It's been a good one." This guy pretty much said he was done with living life and now wanted freedom in heaven. However, I doubt someone who's done what he's done would go to heaven whatsoever. Next up is Christina Marie Riggs. It's a mother's natural instinct to care about their children. If you're a parent, I'm sure you would do absolutely anything to protect your children. Well, that's why in 2000, the world was stunned when Christina took the life of her 2 children. She used a pillow and smothered both of her children. She then tried to off herself using poison, but it didn't work. When she was arrested and went to trial, she fired her lawyer. She said she actually wanted to have her life ended by the state. So she was sentenced to an injection and gave some very chilling last words. Her last words were, "There is no way words can express how sorry I am for taking the lives of my babies. Now I can be with my babies as I intended. I love you, my babies." Those are some very creepy and haunting final words. And as a final twist to this very weird story, she was poisoned by the same poison she tried to end her life with before. Next up is Thomas J. Grasso. From this list, it's obvious these people don't have their priorities straight. They seem to really not care about what happens to them whatsoever. And these are some final words which prove this exactly. Thomas J. Grasso was a man who took the life of 87-year-old Hilda Johnson using Christmas tree lights. 6 months later, he moved to New York. But when there, he took the life of 81-year-old Leslie Holtz. He then stole a tiny amount of money from his social security check. Eventually, he was caught up with by the cops and was arrested. He was sentenced to have an injection in 1995. And we all know that these people are allowed to have one final last meal. Well, Thomas requested SpaghettiOs. However, they didn't have any SpaghettiOs, so instead they gave him spaghetti. When he was asked for any last words, he said, "I did not get my SpaghettiOs. I got spaghetti, and I want the press to know this." This guy didn't have his priorities straight whatsoever. Did he really think the press would be sympathetic that he didn't get his favorite last meal? Instead of being worried about his life ending, he's worried about having spaghetti instead of SpaghettiOs. This just proves that many people on this list have a few screws loose. Next up is Roger Keith Coleman. Families always stick together, right? Well, not in the case of Roger Keith Coleman. In 1981, he took the life of his sister-in-law, Wanda McCoy. He'd been laid off work that same day and was incredibly angry. He was quickly caught up to by the police and arrested. But Coleman's trial was very controversial. Because DNA testing was not very advanced back then, Roger was one of 10 million potential people who could have committed the crime. Thanks to this, Coleman said there was a massive injustice, as he said he was innocent. His final words were, "An innocent man is going to have his life taken tonight. When my innocence is proven, I hope Americans will realize the injustice of the death penalty as other civilized countries have." However, a couple of years later, it was confirmed that Roger did in fact do the crime. They did further DNA analysis and found out it really was him. But that is a little bit too late. Really, they should have done this before ending his life. Thankfully, he was actually the perpetrator in this instance. But it really does make you wonder how many innocent people may have had their lives ended over the years. Next up is George Appel. So here's another very scary man who decided to crack jokes for his last words. George Appel had taken the life of a police officer one day. Of course, this is an incredibly serious crime. This happened in the 1960s, and he was quickly picked up by the NYPD. In court, he was sentenced to have his life ended by the electric chair. And his final haunting, yet humorous last words were, "Here's your headline, boys, baked apple." This is very similar to James French from before, who said, "How's this for a headline? French fries." I guess evil minds really think alike. Next up is Lavinia Fisher. So this woman's life is so crazy there should be a Hollywood movie made about it. Nearly 200 years ago, this woman went on a rampage. In South Carolina, this woman owned a hotel called the 6 Mile Hotel. But for some reason, a large amount of male guests who stayed there went missing. It took forever for police to find this out, but they eventually realized she'd been enticing men to come into the hotel. Once they were inside, she would give them spiked tea. The men would then pass out and she would put them down in the basement. Then in the basement, she would take their life. However, her rampage came to an end one night when John Peoples came to stay at her hotel. She offered him the spiked tea as usual. John didn't like tea, but he didn't want to seem rude, so he accepted the tea. However, whenever she wasn't looking, he would pour it away. Then, after her showing him the basement, he began getting suspicious, thinking she may be able to rob him. He then fled the hotel and alerted the police. He had no idea what was actually going on and thought it was a simple robbery. But when the police went to the hotel, they found the remains of 200 men under the basement. Lavinia was sentenced to hanging, but just before this happened, she yelled her very famous and chilling last words to the crowd. She said, "If you have a message you want to send to hell, give it to me, I'll carry it." She then jumped from the scaffolding, hanging herself, instead of waiting for the trap door to open. It's safe to say this woman is one very crazy criminal. Check out the poll in the top right corner to vote for the most haunting last words on this list. If you guys want more amazing videos, check out my second channel. There'll be a link to that on screen in a moment. But as always, thanks for watching. Check out some more videos on screen right now. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and if you haven't already, what you're waiting for, subscribe to Top 10s.